All right, we're live. I'm here with Tim Hardin. We are a little late, and it's all my fault. I'm going to be just really transparent with you on why we're late. I was actually on the phone doing an interview with a newspaper reporter about a property tax related topic, and I was wound up in the conversation, and I got done with it. And Tim's like, "Hey, man, let's start at 3." And I'm like, "Well, I missed that boat." I apologize to anybody that was sitting there waiting for us to join, but let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. Tim Hardin is here with me. He serves as the president and CEO of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. He has an undergraduate degree in philosophy and political science from the University of North Texas. Go Big Green.
Yes,
He's
sir.
also earned his master's degree in biblical studies from West Coast Baptist College. He's a small businessman and a pastor that served as chief of staff for the Texas House for 8 years. He resides in Fort Worth with his wife, Louisa, and their 5 children. And Tim, it is so great to have you. I can tell you from my personal standpoint, the reason why I wanted you to come on is because there have been so many times where I'm trying to navigate the waters of property tax related topics, and the question of how can we get to the end of this and not have to protest every year? How can we solve these problems at their source? I know I've got some ideas on how to do that. You've got some ideas on how to do that, and but one of the hardest things to do is to gain some kind of consensus on what kind of solutions we can have, or would actually bring about change. And you're one of the few people that actually has the information to put some of this in context and to give us an idea of what our legislature is actually doing, and kind of the enormity of the numbers of what's going on in our budgets, and what kind of revenue we would have to account for to displace and find alternatives for it, and that sort of thing. And you just have the level of information, the quality of information you have, and the plans that you have that you've been able to articulate are better than anybody else. I go anywhere else and I hear about people that want to eliminate property tax or want to do any number of other things, and they don't have a plan or have the information to back it up. And that's what differentiates you. And so I wanted to get on and talk a little bit about what our legislature is doing and what to expect, and really just dive in and let you explain to the people that listen to me on a regular basis. I want them to hear from you, and you to just bring us all up to speed on what you're seeing from your perspective. So, Tim, it's open ended, man. What do you want to share? What do you think would be useful for people to know about?
Well, thanks for setting that impossible standard to live up to.
Now fix this entire problem for us now.
So I think, the best place to start is what's going on right now in the legislative session, right? We can get into kind of the plan to eliminate property tax. That's not going to happen this session. I'm very, very confident that that's not going to happen this session, but that will continue to be our plan at Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. But let's kind of break down what's happened this legislative session. So right now we are in the very last week of the legislative session. I believe Sine Die is Memorial Day, which is 2 Mondays from now.
What does that mean?
That means that it is the last day of session. There's 140 days of legislative session. And so it typically starts, I think, second Tuesday of January and runs all the way through whatever 140 days adds up to. This go round, it's on Memorial Day. And so what that means is we're hitting deadlines this week on what bills we can pass. I believe today is the last day for the House to pass bills. Tomorrow is the last day for the Senate to pass bills. And then we will go into reconciling bills that are in conference, basically, for the rest of the legislative session. And for those who don't know what that is, it's when you have a different version of the House and Senate, they'll typically either concur with the amendments the other chamber put on, or they'll go to a conference committee and then they'll agree with that report or disagree with that report. And so we're in the very, very final stages. As of right now, we still do not have a major property tax bill that has officially passed and gone to the governor's desk. Now, what we do have is we have a bill that has gone, it's passed through the Senate. It was amended heavily in the House, and it has gone back to the Senate now. And we are just awaiting on either the Senate to concur with the House amendments or appoint a conference committee and deal with the changes. And so let's talk quickly about what bill we have in front of us. And so from the beginning of session, the Senate had a package of 3 different bills. SB 3 would have raised the homestead exemption to $70,000 from the currently $40,000 limit. SB4 was adding about $5.5 billion in compression, which is basically just compressing school M&O rates downward. And then they had a business private property thing that, it really wouldn't affect homesteaded people.
I want to interrupt you, okay? Because
Sure.
I think that you're getting into stuff that I think is really good for us to be able to understand, so we can wrap our head around just how the legislature is trying to solve these problems. But I just want to come back to where we're at right now, because I'm afraid we might not come back to it. So the House and the Senate both passed their version of property tax reform, right? Relief or reform, and just pick your word. Then so it seems like the Senate version, the Senate kind of set the temperature. The House passed their version. The Senate said, no, we're not going to go with that. But so then the Senate revised, or the House revised the Senate's version, and now they've kicked it back to the Senate. Let me just ask you two things, and I know I'm jumping the gun because you're getting into it right now. Well, do you think that there's any chance that the Senate will accept what the House just sent over to them?
Yeah, I think there's a chance they will. Yes.
Really? Okay. And here's the big question. In my mind, there's one major difference between the Senate and the House, and you're about to dive into it and kind of get granular, it sounds like, and which I really appreciate, because not everybody could do that, and that's why we're talking, is because you can do that. But and I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but it seemed like the major difference between the House version and the Senate version were property value caps that were in the House version of the bill. When the bill that got the bill that recently just got revised and sent back to the Senate, did it include the value caps or no?
Yes, it did.
Woo! And you think there's a chance the Senate will accept it?
They're currently in talks right now. Yeah. And so I can kind of tell you what I'm hearing, and this is just rumor and speculation, right? But I would say the bigger part that the House added, SB3, which was the homestead exemption, this is what the bill we're dealing with. And so what the House did was they actually increased the homestead exemption on SB3 from 70 to 100,000. So they bumped that up another 30. And then they added $12 billion in compression.
Okay, so time out. On that homestead exemption, a lot of people don't know this, but there's two components of a homestead exemption that benefit homeowners. One of them is that 10% cap on value increase. But then the second part is what happens kind of behind the scenes. Whenever your tax bill is calculated, there's actual money deducted from what's going to get taxed. It started out at 25,000. They bumped it up to like 50,000.
40 then, last go around, yeah.
40. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so then they were proposing 70,000. And when they proposed 70,000, I want to give you credit for this. Tim said, just wait. You don't have to hold your breath to wait until they bump it up to 100,000. And they did exactly what you said. So, okay. So way to go, Tim. So you've got, so they've got the, gosh, dog, I interrupted. And can you pick it back up with?
Sure, yeah, no problem. So
I'm here to shoot your wheels off, and then
it's a conversation.
We're together. All right.
No worries.
All right.
So they did bump this 70,000 up to 100,000. The House added in both provisions of their bill, which was HB2, which is $12 billion in M&O compression, which is actually twice as much as the Senate was offering. So this is a very, very good provision. This is going to, I believe, compress rates by 15 cents. And I think that's the best part of the bill. It's better than the homestead exemption and certainly better than the appraisal caps. Caps, what they added is it's a 5% cap for all.
Time out. Let's camp out for just a second on the M&O.
Sure.
All right. So you said the House added $12 billion of M&O compression. Okay. So this is the thing that you've been really, really trying to hold them accountable on, and cracking the whip, saying, hey, guys, y'all need to increase the compression. So in a nutshell, the M&O compression, what that's doing is that's actually taking money from our property tax bill and removing it so that we don't have to pay that, and it's paid on the state level out of surplus funds that are already sitting there waiting, right? That's basically what you're talking about.
Yeah, essentially what they do is they compress rates by dedicating portions of it to general revenue. And so essentially when they compress like 15 cents, you can think of it in simplistic terms. It's more confusing than this, but you can think of it as 15 percentage points, right?
Gotcha.
Like I said, it's a little more complicated than that, but just for simplicity's sake. So it will be permanently dedicated to the budget. And so this is why we prefer compression because compression, since it's based on a percentage, roughly, it's better than homestead exemptions, which are dollar-based, which are inflated away through appraisal gains and just the monetary policy we have in the United States. And so compression provides permanent relief that now becomes a permanent part of our budget. And so when they compress this $12 billion, if you look at the fiscal note, they continue to compress for years and years and years. And
Cool.
so this is
That's
why
good.
it gets us closer to eliminating M&O off of your property tax. This is why we prefer it. It's just the best form of property tax relief.
Yeah, and that's something that you and I agree on. There's a counterpoint that I have. I guess I should go ahead and ask you the counterpoint now, because I think that there's a good, legitimate question out there. In fact, there's only one potential downfall. I want to hear your response to it. But before I ask you about that, so in a nutshell, this version of the bill that's being considered, it's putting a ton of money, $12 billion, towards eliminating half of your school district property tax, which is the biggest part of our property tax bill. Okay, so, and I agree, that's the best way, the best form of property tax reform we could get, because it actually eliminates chunks of our property tax. Now, here's the question: if our school districts are going to start being funded from the state level instead of the local level, does that encourage, or does that eliminate some accountability that we have on the local level? You know, since we're not paying our school districts locally, would that eliminate some accountability that we would have locally, and instead allowing, Big Brother, the state, to kind of come in and dictate things on a higher level? What do you have to say about that?
Certainly not. One, all the equations that they use are based on state law, and just compressing a portion of the tax does not completely. We would like for it to move it over all completely, but like in 2019, they passed $5 billion in compression. That's been going for a couple of years now, right? And so just because we lower and compress rates doesn't really take away from like your ability to elect school boards, their ability to set budgets, and all of this thing, which there's actually problems associated with that. And I'd like to see more restrictions and spending caps on local governments. But as far as like the amount allocated per student and the funding to the school, it does not affect any of that. It only will help things like recapture and Robin Hood and things like that the more we compress, but we simply just haven't compressed enough to even really start having that conversation. But but in the hypothetical that we were able to eliminate M&O, still no, it would not affect that.
All right, cool. No, it's good. I know that you're into this a lot more than me, understanding these nuances, and I knew that it was a question you've probably thought about before. So I appreciate getting that. All right, now let's see if you can get the train back on the tracks. Where are we at?
Okay, so to the appraisal cap. So the final provision of the bill is a 5% appraisal cap on all real property. As you mentioned, we have a 10% appraisal cap on homesteaded homes right now. And what that House is doing is they're not only lowering that to 5%, but they're applying it to all real property, which would include investment properties, which currently aren't capped. And so this is not a bad
including commercial.
Yeah, including commercial. Yeah,
okay.
All real property will be now capped at 5% if this passes.
If you saw yesterday's interview, which I'm just talking to the people that might be watching, me and you align on a lot of things. One thing, and I don't know where you stand on this, it doesn't even matter, but I think that it's catastrophic for that value cap to include commercial property. I think it's catastrophic for homeowners, and I would say for single family residential property owners, it's catastrophic. It's a bad thing. Then my concern is if that passes, then Texas is screwed, and there's no hope in coming back from that decision.
It makes the whole system inequitable, right? Because when you cap the corporate, ultimately, who's going to bear more of the burden? Well, it's going to switch back to homeowners, right? So overall, I go back and forth with a lot of people about appraisal caps, and like I'm not willing to say it's bad, but it is certainly. It's not a reform we should be seeking in Texas, right? I understand why people are frustrated with the appraisal caps, but when we apply it to all real property, and you saw this in the witness testimony for HB2, overwhelmingly, almost every single witness, whether it's private witness or business interests, say, listen, these things are bad. Just look at California. This is not a good reform. We want these removed, and of course they kept it back in. And so the big question is the Senate going to keep the caps in or not? I could get, unless you have questions, I can get to kind of where I think we're at and what I'm hearing from the Capitol, unless you got something else for me.
No. I mean, this is the hot topic for me. It really, honestly, I can go to red hot rage just like this, thinking about it, because I'm sitting here talking to people on a daily basis about how much money they're paying in property tax, and I get to hear the real pain. So for me, it's a raw nerve, and to think that they might pass something that's just going to screw us even worse. It's just devastating for me to think about that. Now, so personally, I'm okay with a value caps for single family residential homes, just because right now the way that the scales are balanced is residential is getting hosed. And so I don't like the idea of every legislative session we're constantly picking winners and picking losers. And I think that the way around all of that is through rate compression.
Yep.
But if we're not going to get the kind of rate compression to actually get rid of M&O, then I'm going to say we need to dogpile on single family residential. Those need to be the winners, because right now we're losing. And so anyway, it's just something that drives me crazy. I know that what's his name? Who's the Senate leader? What's his name?
Dan Patrick.
Yeah, he came out very strong, said, I am not going to pass anything that has caps. And I guess we get to see how strong if he's going to stand behind that. Huh?
From our perspective, the main reason we don't like caps is because caps do not lower property taxes.
Yeah.
Despite your argument, it's not going to lower anyone's property tax bill. As a matter of fact, it might make them higher. Right. And so what we want and what homeowners need in Texas is relief, because of just the massive amount of property taxes everybody's been paying in the last couple of years with the appraisal increases and with, like I said, an inflation rate at 9% last year. I mean, people are just hurting, and a percentage rate compression is just going to be the best case scenario for everyone.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, you can continue with the story.
So what we're hearing, and this, just warning, this is speculation and rumor. That we operate a lot on this in politics, but in my experience, it's about 80% accurate typically when we hear rumors out of the Capitol. And so what we're hearing right now is in the Senate, there's confusion because the House passed this version of the bill over, but this bill has to be funded through our budget, and the budget only set aside, I think it was 10 or 12 billion. We don't have the budget conference committee report either. So we don't really know where that's at either. So we're in the dark in a lot of stuff, but people don't think we have enough money to fund this bill. And so the reason we haven't heard anything about this bill is we're not sure they placed enough money in the General Appropriations Act, HB 1, to actually fund this. And so I think that's one of the things they're working on. And if they didn't, they have two options. One, they can water down the bill and make it weaker, right? Which would basically be removing compression or moving the homestead exemption back down. That's one option. The other option is to change the budget. The problem with that is most of the people in the Capitol, the appropriators, do not want to break our constitutional spending cap. We're about $1 billion away from it right now. And so in our opinion, and I think in most taxpayers' opinions, we are fine with you breaking that cap if you're going to provide property tax relief. But the legislators think it's the fiscal responsible thing to do to not break that cap. And just to give people an idea of, it's absolutely possible. Of the $33 billion surplus, yet again, we don't know the exact number. We haven't seen the budget committee report, but we're estimating probably somewhere in between $15 to $18 billion of that surplus is just hanging out, not being used. And so we could absolutely break the cap and provide the relief, but it's very apparent that neither chamber wants to break this cap. And
okay.
So that's where we're at.
This makes my head is about to explode, and this is just what makes me crazy. This is like such a slimy political theater, because everybody's parading around. Yes, we're going to do all sorts of stuff for property tax relief, reform, all this stuff. But then they say, oh, we can't because there's a spending limit. So then they act like, well, we can't. And then they're going to say, they impose their own restrictions and act like they're helpless when they have the ability to change the rules. And it just drives me freaking nuts. It's crazy. And it's maddening to me. Like, it kind of makes sense, but from just a layman's point of view, you would think, why in the world would property tax relief count as spending money at all? It shouldn't be counted as spending money. They're giving us the money, not some organization. They're giving it to the people. That shouldn't be counted as spending money. And so it is a completely disingenuous argument for them to be talking about increasing the relief that they're going to provide without a simultaneous conversation of how do we exempt property tax relief from those spending limits. That has to be done. And if they're not talking about it, to me, it's like, man, I just want to vote these punks out. And
I have a
family-friendly show, but I just want to cuss, man.
Yeah.
It's like, you freaking punks.
Yeah.
This is not okay.
So I have good news for you. One, there's multiple spending caps. And what we're talking about is the constitutional, or I think it's called the pay-as-you-go spending cap, right? And so this is a really old one. And they actually introduced an HJR, House Joint Resolution, which would be a constitutional amendment we would have to vote on if it passes. That would exempt property tax relief from future spending caps. The one we passed last go around, which was Senator Hancock's bill, it did exempt property tax relief. But like I said, there's multiple caps. And so if HJR, I think it's HJR 2, I could be wrong, passes, we will vote on that in November. And then in the future, we will be able to apply whatever without breaking the cap. But even if that's not the case, right, let's just say that they don't pass that, right? The fact is, one, this specific cap can be broke by a simple majority in both chambers. So some caps are 3/5 or 2/3. This one can be broke by a simple majority. Of course, Republicans hold way more than simple majorities in both chambers. And the biggest reason you hear them say, well, we don't want to break this cap, is they're fearful of an economic downturn. Well, what if an economic downturn comes? Well, fortunately, they don't like to advertise this, but we have this fund called the Economic Stabilization Fund, or the Rainy Day Fund, that's literally designed just for that. And they are projecting that this fund in like 1 or 2 years is going to have $25 billion in it. And so we actually already have a fund that protects for that. Now, they don't actually use that. I've seen it used for its proper its proper purpose one time, and that was during Harvey. It's for disasters and economic downturns. So they released a few $1 billion up for Harvey. I think this was 2017 maybe. And other than that, they use it as a slush fund. So when there's shortages in the budget, they'll give teachers raises with it, or they'll make ERS, which is this broken pension system. They'll use it as a slush fund, right? But it's a misnomer to say, oh, well, we're saving this other stack of money for an economic downturn when we already have a stack reserved for that. And so they're just wanting to hold on to as much of this money as possible. And then you get these kind of hypocritical things like HB 5, which is the largest corporate welfare program in Texas. They're trying to revive. And so last year, Chapter 313, which is a property tax abatement program, expired. Well, they've spent much of this session trying to create, I think it's 405. They changed the number, right? But it's essentially school districts can give corporations property tax abatements. And the vast majority of the time, you're talking 90 to 100% of their property taxes are abated for 10 years. And so they're perfectly fine exempting multinational woke corporations like Facebook and Samsung. They don't have to pay property taxes. But you, as the homeowner who's drowning, you're going to have to pay yours, or we're going to give you kind of some trinkets. And so that's the real travesty when we're talking about the budget and if there's enough money there. We don't have a revenue problem, right? We have a spending problem.
Yeah, right. And it is a spending problem. Well, I mean, I think it's a spending problem, plus the lines are drawn in an unfair way. And so, but at the core of it, if we took care of the spending, then we wouldn't, the lines wouldn't be as consequential. But, okay. So this 313 thing, to the average person doesn't mean a whole lot, but when you go down and into Austin and you start talking about what bills are being considered, and you look at the amount of passion that people have for different bills, like the 313 stuff gets a lot of attention and it's super exciting. And so so what it is you're saying it's basically so that school districts can give abatements to companies, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we already have abatements that you can get through a city, right?
312s.
Okay.
Those are 312s. Yep.
Say it again.
Those are called 312s, and that's a reference to the tax code. That's all that is. So 312 of the tax code, the cities can do it, and then the 313s was the school districts portion.
Okay, so they used to be able to do that, then that expired, and so right now they can't do that. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and they're trying to bring it back through some other legislation.
Correct.
Okay, would it be accurate to me for me to just call that corporate welfare?
100%. That's what we call it. Yes.
Okay, so here's the thing, Tim. Okay, I'm not interested in it. I don't like it, but I will say this. That is, I feel like it's being done in front of our face a little bit more. Like this is, if you can go on the tax rate, whatever spreadsheet and look at, there's a column on there for the different types of exemptions. And one column is for abatements and Freeport. And so, so the little box is going to be checked if that particular taxing entity allows that type of exemption, right? And so then we can hold our local elected officials accountable for those things if they're passing it. So to me, it's like, okay, I'm not interested in doing that and having that, but it is being done in front of our face. So in some ways, it's kind of like, well, we only have ourselves to blame if we allow that to happen. And then if our local school district decides that they're going to participate in this, then we need to raise hell, you know?
Yeah. For them, it's a win-win because it's reimbursed through, I believe, sales tax. So through GR. And so when they so they'll abate these people, these corporations' property taxes, but the school does not lose money on this. The state reimburses them through general revenue. And so it's because we have so much sales tax, they set aside a certain portion of GR to make them whole. And so it's win-win for them because they can say, hey, we got this corporation put its headquarters here. We brought jobs to the district and we didn't lose any money at all. But the problem is they're still using our tax dollars to give to corporations who, statistically, and even based on a poll that UT did, that only 15% of these corporations that accept these 313s even considered it in moving to Texas. So these corporations don't even care if they get it. They're not making it their decision to come to Texas based on these abatements. But if you offer them free money, they're going to take it. And they certainly have lobbyists that are trying to get them more free money, but it's not going to be the decision maker for the vast majority of these companies.
So what I don't understand, Tim, like I get why a city is going to, spend an arm and a leg to get an employer to come to town. It can change the culture of the city. It can bring economic, incentives. It brings jobs, and it can change the culture. Like for instance, in Arlington, they brought in Dallas Cowboys. Well, now it just adds to Arlington being like this entertainment mecca, So although I may not agree with it, in fact, the eminent domain stuff I look at as kind of evil, but at the same time, it's like I can understand the other side, even though I don't agree with it.
Sure.
But I'm having trouble putting my finger on why a school district would care enough to grant some employer an abatement. Like it just seems like that's not our school district's role. Shouldn't be to do that. It should be a city's role.
Yeah, you wouldn't think we elect school boards to give tax abatements to corporations, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm with you there. I wish I could make sense of it for you, but I can't.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just real quick before we move to something else. I just want to show people what I'm talking about. If you want to go see whether or not your local school district or city is participating in this, if in Tarrant County, at least, you just Google Tarrant County property tax rates, and then you can find this spreadsheet here. And then when you zoom in, it looks really complicated because it's ridiculously confusing, but you can start to decode this if you just pay attention to it. So I just want to expose you to it, see what it looks like. Right. Let's see here. You've got, what is this? Freeport right here. And this is the AB stands for abatements. Is that right?
I believe so. Yes.
And so on the first sheet, you've got all the cities. And then you scroll down, and then on the second sheet, you've got all the school districts. So you can see which cities and school districts are agreeing to this. And it looks like maybe some of these things are still hanging over, but you've got abatements. They'll allow abatements, I guess. And so that's basically corporate welfare type stuff. And so honestly, that's about the extent of my knowledge on that, but I just know where you can go to find it. And every single year, I've been doing this since 2017, and every single year there's a completely different area that I start diving into that I didn't know about before, and I start to get educated on it. And I haven't gone into these areas. It's just ridiculous how much there is to know in property taxes, and how all the little nooks and crannies that they get you, and they hide money and they give advantages to certain groups. And it's disgusting and it's crazy. It shouldn't be this complicated, but I'm just so glad that you're on here, because I don't know, a lot of this stuff goes over my head. So,
well, so, some of it goes over my head too. I'm certainly not, the end all be all expert. I've been paying attention for a few years, like yourself. Of course, my time in the legislature helped me to kind of understand how the system works. But we also work with like Vance Ginn, who's a PhD economist, and quite a few other folks who we all just kind of share information. And that's really the only way we can survive, because these systems have existed for decades and decades. And there's a very few people in the state or in cities who even understand how these things work. And it's purposely meant to be that way, which is why, people like yourself and Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, other fiscal organizations are important, because it helps the average person decode what's going on, because who has time to go through all of this unless it's literally your job,
Yeah.
and that's what I've done. Is it's literally my job to kind of get to know this. If I had another full-time job, I would not be able to do this, because it just takes too much time.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, but that's the reality.
And honestly, Tim, the one reason why I'm excited to have you on is because it doesn't matter if somebody agrees with your political stance that you might have, or your proposed solutions to a problem. I think that it's healthy to have disagreement. I don't mind people disagreeing. The reason why I want to have you on is because the quality of information that you have to understand the problem is superior to anybody else. It's not to say that there are some geniuses out there that understand the copper pennies and the silver pennies and all this crazy stuff that, all the lingo, but there's a real world application in how it affects humans and the taxpayers, the people on the street here, that it seems like there's a real disconnect between the nerds and the legislators. The legislators don't know this stuff either,
No, I think I know more than most of the legislators. As a matter of fact, I've had conversations with many of them and had to kind of explain things to them. But I think you're right. In our existence, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility is to serve one person, the voter and the taxpayer. We don't exist necessarily to influence policy. We try, but our mission is transparency for taxpayers. And so we regard taxpayers and our donors. We have hundreds of individual donors that help fund us. We're a nonprofit organization. And so we have other people, like, for instance, TPPF, which is a good group, and I don't want to say anything bad about them, but they exist to change policy. And so they're basically trying to serve lawmakers, right? Which is, I think they do really good work, but we have different missions, right? And so they are talking like white papers, confusing things. They have fancy economists with, letters behind their names, but you get lost in all that as an average person. And so we exist to be that conduit, right? To kind of translate all of that confusing stuff and say, hey, here's what it actually means. We do that. And then the other service we provide is we have the Fiscal Responsibility Index, which is we give basically lawmakers grades based on how they vote on fiscal issues. And so it's just another transparency piece where you can see kind of roughly how your lawmaker has done, how they voted on property tax and the budget and things like that. So
gotcha. Cool. Good deal, man. All right. So where do we leave off, or what else do you want to get into?
So property tax reform. So I think we definitely are going to get something. If I had to speculate, I think you asked if there's a chance of it. And so I answered, yes, there's a chance. That doesn't mean I think necessarily I think they're going to water down the bill a little bit. I think they're probably, and I could be wrong, they're probably going to reduce compression, and they're probably going to lose those caps. If I had to bet. Now, I'm not 100% positive what they're going to do. We'll find out in the next few days. Go ahead.
We'll find out. Okay. So we've got to find out. The Senate's got to pass it by the 25th?
No, it's Friday, I believe, is the deadline for committee reports. I could be wrong on a day, but so bills tomorrow is the last day for bills, but this has already passed through both chambers. So they're in that concurring or conference committee. And I believe the date on that is Friday. It's either Friday or Saturday. So we have basically until the end of the week for them to figure this out.
We'll know by Monday if we're going to get property tax relief now. And then if not, it's going to special session.
Correct. And
Okay.
there's speculation that they're going to go to a special session with school choice. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, on if that's in your wheelhouse or not, but that certainly involves the budget. The other concern we have is just the size of the budget and how much they've been spending. We kind of touched on it during the property tax talk, but the current version that we've seen, and we haven't seen the committee report, so we don't know the final numbers, is our budget is roughly, including federal dollars, about $308 billion. And so what that represents is since 2000, we have more than tripled our budget in Texas. And they've tried, the conservative metric is they try to keep us, or have kind of tried to keep us, with inflation and population growth, right? And so population growth has been 40% since 2000, based on last year's numbers. And so if you add in the average rate of, it's usually, except for the last couple of years, about 2 to 4% inflation is usually what they leave room for. But these last couple of years, it's been 9. And so that made our cap 12.3%, which would be the equation that adds in population growth plus inflation. And so that's how much we were allowed to grow as a state budget without breaking that cap. Typically, a normal biennial growth is about 5%, maybe 6%. And so we've more than doubled the amount we're growing, kind of biennium over biennium.
Okay. Where's the money going? Who's getting the money?
They're spreading it around everywhere.
Okay.
And so there has been a massive amount of corporate welfare, not just HB5, that big program we talked about, but there's grants. There was a bill that dedicated $1 billion to the music. They're trying to turn Austin into the new Hollywood. And so there's literally hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars being spent on subsidies or corporate welfare, right, for entertainment, for music, for movies. There's the governor's enterprise fund. They have passed dozens and dozens of bills for corporate welfare.
It's just all over the place.
Yes.
Everybody's got their hand out, and anybody gets their hand out, they get money put in their hands.
Higher ed's getting $5 billion more dollars, I believe. Like everyone's just getting huge increases, and everyone is getting inflation adjustments, including the lawmakers. They voted twice to adjust their own pensions for inflation. Guess what they didn't adjust for inflation? This historic number they keep talking about, which is
okay. Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to touch on that.
Yeah,
so, all right, yeah, go ahead.
So in 2008, they compressed rates by $14.2 billion. And so when Abbott and the leaders in both chambers said, hey, we're going to provide the biggest property tax cut in Texas history, this is the number they're trying to go with. And so they wanted to beat that. And so they started off the session by saying $15 billion would get this done. We called them out on a few, kind of bits of fuzzy math. One, they were using 5.3 in old compression. If you remember, I talked about when they compress rates, it gets permanently dedicated to the budget. So they were using this permanently dedicated compression, 5.3 billion they passed in 2019. They were using that to get themselves up to $15 billion. And so, of course, we called them up. We're like, no. You can't use the old compression. You're saying $15 billion. You're actually at $9 billion. You're not even there. But we also made the point, but even if you're going to say we have the largest in history, y'all are adjusting for inflation. 2008 dollars are not the same as 2023 dollars. And so we need to adjust that in the same way y'all adjust all agencies and even your own pensions, right? And if you do that, the latest calculation we have is $20.4 billion. That would be the equivalent in 2023 dollars. And so the latest number they had
so they're saying, hey, we're going to go out there and pass the largest property tax relief in history. But what they didn't tell us is part of that is just renewing some of the old tax breaks that they already gave us. And then
it's
the
not
rest
even
of
renewing
it.
It's permanently dedicated. So they didn't even have to do anything. Like, I'll give you this example. If they did nothing, absolutely nothing, no property tax relief, that $5.3 billion is still being compressed because it's part of the budget. So they didn't even have to renew it. They passed it years ago. And so they're literally just kind of making stuff up.
I don't understand this. It's like in an environment where you win by a popularity contest and the amount of trust that you have with the public, why would they be deceptive about it? It's like, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, why not just shoot straight with everybody? And, instead of all this political stuff, it's how politicians get a bad name. And you know what? I mean, like, anytime we're throwing stones in this conversation, you've got to lay a ton of this at the feet of the Republicans because
Yeah.
they're the ones in power. They have the numbers. It's like, you dingbats, get your act together and step it up and quit horsing around and like be straight with us and then do something real, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. It's just very frustrating.
I think honestly, a lot of this is a reaction towards fiscal groups like ourselves who are saying, hey, you need to hit this, but no. And so you've seen them, their numbers have changed as a reaction towards, you know, when they didn't hit the 15, well, then they got up to 15, but they were still using the 5.3. And we said, no, you need to be at 20. And so the latest number they had with the SB3 that passed, they said, hey, we have 21 billion in compression, right? And they're still using the old compression. Right. So if you look at the fiscal note of SB3, they're actually at 16.2 billion. And so if you don't add in inflation, then yes, technically they beat, if they passed the SB3 out of the House in its current form, they would have the non-inflation adjusted, you know, they would beat that 14.2. But we have, I mean, to answer your question, I don't know why they can't just be straight with people either, because the reality is I don't think most people truly kind of understand like what those billions of dollars actually mean. And so even if they said, hey, we're providing $16.2 billion in property tax relief, and we're just straight up honest, I would say, good job. Hey, we're proud of you. You did a good job.
The people that don't know any better are going to say, well, that sounds good. And the people that actually know, they're going to be like, okay, well, you've taken away their argument. So where's your downfall? You know, it doesn't make any sense.
Were you paying attention when we kind of mentioned that Dan Patrick? So he had Trump endorse his plan. And Trump said they're providing 28 or 27 billion in property. And we're like, where on earth are they getting this number?
It's
and
Trump.
we found out. Right. So Patrick in an interview with, I think, Dallas Morning News maybe, said he added up the average savings of a 30-year amortized mortgage.
Oh my gosh.
At their rates. And that's where he got 27. So he's basically saying, we're saving you $27 billion over the course of 30 years. Right. And so, but he doesn't tell people that. He just says, we have a $27 billion tax. And it's like, why? Why are y'all lying?
It's comical. It's just comical. Ridiculous. Yeah. It would be funny if it wasn't so serious, you know?
Yeah.
God, dog, it's crazy. And why the heck is Trump even saying anything? It's so stupid.
Well, it's because he's running for president and he wants allies, you know, in Texas.
Yeah.
And of course, we heard DeSantis is announcing on Wednesday. And so, you know, Trump wants as many of his allies in Texas to endorse him so he can secure the presidential nomination next year. And so I would imagine that's the reason he did that. So, and Dan Patrick has been a supporter, and I imagine will continue to be a supporter and endorse Trump into the primary. So,
you know, well, so Tim, I have heard, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything you want to say, because, you know, it's kind of cool that this is our first real conversation. It's live in front of everybody, because I want to ask you all the questions that I just want to ask you, because I know that you know a lot of stuff that I don't know. And I'm genuinely just curious to learn. You know, it's kind of interesting how every time I hear you talk, you're giving information and you're like opening my eyes to all these shenanigans that are going on behind the scenes, and like the tricks and all the math, and how you're just dispelling the BS and helping me cut through it all, which I really appreciate. But I don't hear you really championing your message of eliminate property tax as much. It just seems like you understand it would be great to accomplish that goal, but also we've got the here and now, and where we're at now, it seems like it's so far away from this. You just kind of have focused this legislative session on talking about the nuts and bolts. So I know I've heard your message before about eliminating half of the school district tax, which is the M&O portion of the school district tax. To me, that's the only plan that I've ever heard about eliminating any level of property tax that makes sense, that I could personally buy into, because it's just a mathematical thing. You can see it, you can understand it, it's realistic. I think that there are some potential pitfalls from that, but it seems to me like the positives outweigh the negatives, and no matter what you do, there's always going to be some risk involved, and I'd be willing to take that risk, you know? So that's where I'm at on that one. But I don't know, man, do you want to talk about any of the other aspects of how you could eliminate the other parts or not? So, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah. So we started really, you know, talking about this. So Representative Oliverson last cycle, which was they went into 3 special sessions. If you remember when the Democrats like ran to DC and infected everybody with COVID and all that, right? Tom Oliverson out of Cypress, which is Houston area, he introduced a bill that would have used, we knew there was going to be a big surplus. At that time, we thought it was $8 billion. You know, it turned out it was 33, right? It grew over time, but it would have used 90% of the surplus to buy down and pay down M&O compression. And it stipulated until compression was zero, meaning biennium over biennium, we will continue to use these surpluses to continue to compress rates permanently until simply M&O doesn't exist anymore, at least in the property tax bill, right? And so we got more and more excited because as we got updates from the controller, who's the accountant for Texas, it grew from 8 billion to 15 billion. And then I think it went to the low to $27 billion. And then finally at the session, it was 33 billion, right? And so then we're like, if we use 90% of this, we could eliminate M&O in a very, very quick amount of time. And so whether it's us, TPPF has a very similar plan, which is that think tank in Austin.
That's the first time I heard about this was through them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we all have very similar plans because it's a very practical and very feasible plan, right?
And every stinking politician before this legislative session was saying that's the plan that we want. Like every single one of them.
That's right.
And now you don't even hear a peep about it.
So there was 8 bills in the House filed, and there was 1 in the Senate. None of them got hearings. And so this is a separate issue because this ultimately comes down to how the House is run and who runs it, the Speaker of the House, Dave Phelan, right? And just how the dynamics of the House work. There's a reason it didn't get hearings is because this was not dubbed acceptable to leadership. That's why. And so that's why you kind of saw us set down this temporarily to try and get as much for taxpayers as we possibly can. But you better bet your bottom dollar we're going right back to it as soon as the session's over. We just realized, okay, it's not going to happen this session. It's just reality. Maybe if a special session is called, we could beat that drum. But going into the interim, our goal is going to be to get this to be part of the Republican Party platform of Texas.
Man, I tell you, well, I think that's great, but honestly, I don't even understand why the Republican Party platform, like, it doesn't have any teeth at all. It doesn't make sense because it's like, but here's another thought. No matter what happens this legislative session, I think that we're going to get some property tax relief passed. Then just based on my own assessment, which you have a much better assessor, ability to determine this stuff. But my own assessment is I think that this is the last time we're going to see major property tax relief. We're not going to see it in 2 years from now. Then we might see it 2 years from then, because I think that it seems like our legislature is just too timid to make major changes too quick. They want to see how it's going to play out for a while. It seems like after this major reform happens, the next legislative session, they'll just do some incremental changes to just eliminate some of the really jagged edges of whatever problems this causes. And then they're not going to consider anything major until another 2 years after that. So I don't know.
I think it depends. It depends. One, when I served in the legislature, I started in 2013. The number one issue that we got phone calls about was always property tax reform. And so the reality is we've been doing this biennium to biennium for decades now. And even in 2019, when they passed their historic reform, then there were still calls the next session, and they did provide more relief. It wasn't enough. And so they're doing the same thing this go around. And so I'm just going to go ahead and say, I think people, although there's going to be major relief passed, I still think people are going to be very disappointed in how much that actually translates to their actual bill, which is where I see an opportunity to say, listen, enough is enough. And the reality is, and what we're trying to really kind of show people is ultimately when we have a tax system that is a perpetual tax system, right? Where we're literally paying taxes on unrealized gains, right? We are paying rent to the government every single year. There's no other tax really that functions like this. We don't do this with our car. We don't do this with any other piece of personal property we own. So what this is it's actually an infringement upon private property rights, because ultimately the government really owns your property. And if you think they don't own your property, then just stop paying your taxes and you'll see they'll put a lien on your property and they'll take it from you. And so this is where we have to go, is it's a rights issue. And I think this is the mission of the interim is to frame that and say, listen, we need to restore private property rights. Are we going to snap our fingers and make this disappear overnight? No, it likely is going to be an incremental stepping away from it. But I think this is the message we have to bring to voters and taxpayers and say, hey, if you ever want to own your property, if you want to give your property to your kids and not have them pay rent to the government forever, and when they die, their kids pay forever, right? We have to end this immoral way to fund government. There's better ways to fund government. And so I think that we will see a major conversation. Now, they say that any major piece of legislation typically takes 3 legislative sessions to pass. So we're talking 6 years. And so this is a long game. This is something that I'm dedicated to long term. And I've honestly just kind of taken up this is kind of my mission, man. This is what I want to do politically with my life, is eliminate property taxes in Texas. And it starts with school M&O. There is bigger concerns when we get to city and county and special purpose districts, which we're not dealing with just yet because the low hanging fruit is M&O. And so we're going to continue to push for that M&O elimination. And once we get on a path there, one of the missions we have is to come up with an even more robust plan to put us on a complete path to elimination and allow folks to actually own their homes. And so I'm going to take the white pill and be optimistic and say, I think we are going to have a serious conversation. I can't guarantee we're going to pass it, but ultimately it's a rights issue. And I think that's really what we have to stress. Like, it's annoying we're paying more, but I think the bigger problem is you don't own your house. And so we have to restore home ownership to people.
Yeah. So, this is one of the things that I'm very thankful to have been invited to 2 Democrat groups to speak recently, because this is a bipartisan issue. And to me, I think the school choice, I think there's a serious civil rights issue there. And on this issue, I think that you've got a situation where people are being taxed out of their homes, and it affects the lower property value people more than anybody else. And it's a real problem. And when you have entry-level homes that people can't afford, then what it does is it just creates a much larger gap between the haves and the have-nots. People can't get into home ownership. Their what do you call it? Their net worth can't grow. And so it creates a generational trend where it locks people into poverty. And so to me, it's like the Democrats need to be on this like crazy and really beating the drum hardcore. And we need to lock arms. And when you hear a conservative or a Democrat talking about this issue, we need to just put our blinders on about which party they might be with and just look at them like these are a fellow Texan that is getting screwed by the government, and we shouldn't stand for it. We've got to come together on this stuff.
Yeah. One other thing on the low income thing is, this all obviously affects rents as well. A lot of people don't understand. It's like, well, why is my rent going up? It's like, well, because one, as we talked about earlier, the investment property is not capped. And so their taxes are growing at a much higher rate than homesteaded homes. And so rents are going to grow with that. And so a lot of people don't draw that correlation, especially lower income folks, that why is my rent going up? Well, because property taxes are going up. And so if we lower those, it will help you. It will help rent prices. The Democrats' solution is usually like rent controls, but this, once again, laughs in the face of the free market. And we believe that the free market solves all of these problems. Competition solves all these problems. And so,
and the crazy thing is we got so much money sitting there that can solve the problem. We're already picking winners and losers. And, the commercial property, the big business commercial property owners that are not getting they're millions of dollars not getting taxed, it's forcing it right on over to us. And if we just keep having to pick winners and losers, we're just going to get to a level. It's like you won't be able to reform it. You'll get to a point where any reform is going to disrupt the apple cart so much it's just not sustainable. Hey, you touched on something I'm really curious about. I got one person online that I don't know what they're going to do. It almost seems like they're threatening me.
Oh, no.
If I don't talk about this issue. I don't respond to threats very well, by the way, but it's a reoccurring question that I keep getting over and over about the constitutionality of property taxes in general. So I know you're going to, hey man, are you running over on an appointment? Are you good for a little longer?
No, I'm good. I just had a phone call. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't important. It was not important. We're good.
All right. Well, since we started late, I was like, I never set an end time. So are you going to talk for a little while longer?
I'm good to talk for a little while. We're fine.
All right, cool, man. Well, I'm excited to talk with you. So I won't keep you here all day. You can bail out anytime you want. But I got somebody, and it's not just one person. There are a handful of people saying, look, in our Constitution, it says they can't tax our real estate. And so it's almost like some people believe if we just let the government know this tax isn't legal and send the right letter or file the right lawsuit, then we can somehow get out of paying this property tax. To me, it seems like I'm like, first of all, I have no clue what you're talking about. You sound kind of nutty, but even if but also at the same time, I've heard this so many times. I think there's something to it.
Sure.
I think there's some legitimacy to it. And then the only explanation I've been given, I haven't done the research on my own, was they're not taxing the property, they're taxing the use of the property or something like that. And that's how the Constitution is able to jive with this. I don't know, man. Have you heard of this type of argument? And what's your take on this whole thing?
So I believe the constitutional provision is speaking about a state tax, right? And for those who don't know the history of property taxes, we used to have a statewide property tax that existed, I want to say up until maybe like the 70s or 80s, where it finally got phased out. But there was a lot of problems. The property taxes existed for a really long time in Texas, but it was mainly a state property tax. And so the constitutional amendment that was added to the Constitution is in regards to a state property tax. So
Okay.
the code does allow for local governments to be funded through property taxes, but you cannot. It is unconstitutional that's why you'll never see a statewide property tax, because the Constitutional specifically argues against that, right? But local governments, it is very apparent in the code that it is allowed, and there's lots and lots of rules of how we can fund local governments through property taxes. And so that would be my simplistic answer to that. And that's just me. I'm not 100% familiar with the exact code he's probably referencing the Constitution, but I know enough about the history of property taxes that I know that it was added to the Constitution that we no longer have a state property tax. And so this very likely is what he's referencing in the Constitution. So yes, it does say that, but it's in reference to a statewide tax, not to a local tax, like a city or a county or ISD, if that makes sense.
Okay, there's another topic that's kind of fringe, but really fascinating. And I apologize. I was going to do the homework beforehand. I'm just going to lean on you to psychically pick the term out of my head. I'm going to send it. So there are a handful of cities that have experimented with no property tax. I'm wanting to say Von Ormy is one of them. I'm wanting to say there's a term for this kind of city. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Vaguely, I know there's two or three. I want to say it's like payment in lieu of taxes, pilot, or I could be mixing up that concept with. But I do know there's, I think, 2 or 3 cities now that do not have property taxes, but I cannot remember if they're funding through consumption-based tax or another mechanism. So I am too unfamiliar to give you an exact answer, but I can confirm, yes, there are a few cities that do exist that do not have property taxes. Yes.
Cool. Well, I started going down this. Go ahead.
I said, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but you are correct and they do exist. I just can't remember the mechanism by which they fund their local government.
Cool. Well, it is a fascinating thing. I started going down this rabbit trail, and there's one. I think there's Stafford, and then there's another. Mm-hmm. There's a type of city. They've called it something. Anyway, it's fascinating. And one of the cities,
Liberty Cities,
huh?
So Liberty City was
Liberty City. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So this was a term coined by TPPF back in 2015.
Oh. And wait. The thing that got me my brain jogging on this was that guy that wrote the bill that you mentioned a little while ago.
Betancourt or
Tom Oliver.
Oliverson. Yeah. Out of Houston.
Is he involved in the Liberty City thing?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Anyway, there's some dude that's actually kind of like in the mix, and he helped establish a tax-free town. The town went nuts, and I don't know if it's Tom Oliver or not, but anyway. But yeah, that's at Liberty. If you're watching this and you want some more information about how can your city become tax-free, this Liberty City idea. There's a lot of experimental stuff going on, and it seems to me like from what little research I was able to do, that there was every one of these cities seemed like it was near a major commercial thoroughfare, so they could get a bunch of revenue out of sales tax, so they weren't as dependent on the real estate for their funding, and it worked out. In fact, there was one town where it was like the oldest elected official in Texas history, or something like that. The longest serving was the mayor of one of these towns. And then he recently died. I can't remember the situation, but anyway, it's fascinating if you want to Google and go down that bunny trail.
So a couple of things. One, I'm on a lot of conference calls, and so I was on a call this morning with about 15 other people who are all kind of involved in fiscal policy, and we were actually started talking about Liberty Cities this morning, and as a possible solution to property taxes going forward. And so this is probably something we're going to have a conversation about, and I'll probably educate myself a little better on it. So next time we talk, I could probably talk with more authority on Liberty Cities, but this is probably going to be something that a number of different organizations at least want to have a conversation about, right? But I can say when it comes to things like city taxes and county taxes, because cities function differently, because they're different sizes, right? Not every city has the capability of creating a sales tax and funding themselves, right? Bigger cities do, but not every city does. And so that's what makes like the complete elimination of property taxes difficult, because there's a lot of different size cities that function differently across Texas. And so we're really trying to put our heads together to come up with a solution to where after we are able to eliminate M&O, how do we deal with the counties and the cities? Because they function so differently. And so that's something that we're currently in the works to have a solid, feasible solution that people can look at and say, okay, that actually makes sense. As of right now, the Republican Party platform calls for a consumption-based tax, and it's a good idea, but like I said, it doesn't work for every single city. And we're going to have to come up with a better solution for some of these other taxing entities, these local taxing entities. And that's kind of our mission. As soon as session's over, I'm going to start kind of diving back into research and seeing if we can come up with a better solution for cities and counties.
Yeah, some of the downfalls that I was as I was scratching this itch to try and figure out. I know when Huffines was running, he was talking about. I've talked with Russell Bennett. He's a big eliminate property tax, and I was just going down this path, and then I would talk to the proponents, get what information I could hear, and then go to the other side to the people and say this will never work, and then I'll just keep bouncing ideas back and forth, and finally I was like, screw it, I got enough stuff I'm dealing with. I'm not going to worry about it, but. Anyway, the bond ratings and the stability of property tax, it gives a platform for our taxing system so that it keeps things fairly stable. It's just that it's bleeding us out. Hey man, let's go over a handful of these questions that people are asking. They're not a whole lot, but I have a feeling that any question on this area is going to be pretty meaty. So I don't really know what this is. Send ohms, please. I don't know. Maybe it's code for something dirty. I have no idea.
I'm old and not cool. I don't know what it means either.
I don't either. But hey, if you comment, it's getting flashed up here, so it's kind of fun. All right, DRI for government tax. I assume that's a person, maybe a candidate. Who knows? There's a little free publicity. All right, let's see what this says. And by the way, I'm not talented enough to read the comment and then post it up. I actually want to hear what you're saying, so I haven't read these in advance. So it could be something horrible. We never know. All right, he says, is really important when you're going to sell, listed as buy owner, offer a 3% agent who's selling the house to save. Okay, so this is just a real estate question, Alex.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, absolutely. Only if you want your house to be shown by a realtor. And like 94% of all home sales are sold using a realtor. So if you're going to sell your house by owner, I don't talk people out of it. I think that it's probably a bad idea. If you Google Trek 1 to 4 residential resale contract, you'll see one of my videos comes up. It's a 3-hour video on the residential contract. I would recommend at the very least you watch that video if you're going to do it, just so you can be aware of some of the pitfalls. But if you're going to do it, I don't talk you out of it. I would just say that, yeah, if you want your home to be shown, you should be willing to offer a 3% commission to to a realtor that brings a buyer, because you just have to look at it. If you're going to, who cares how much you have to pay somebody if you're going to stick a lot more money in your pocket? If that realtor's got somebody's going to pay you 20 grand more and it's going to cost you 6 grand, well, then you're profiting 14 grand, So, anyway, let's keep going. All right, WK's got a lot of comments here. Let's see what he's got to say. Scary stuff when feds pay schools. Watch all the agendas and mind control propaganda. I think that you have every reason to be concerned about the Fed paying schools, but that's not what you're talking about, Tim, right?
So the federal government does pay a portion of our public school or government schools, right? And I think the Department of Education is a major problem and should be abolished. I think that the school should be a job of the states. And so I think, yeah, there is absolutely indoctrination going on. And a lot of that is mandates coming down from the federal level. And so I think the smartest thing we can do is abolish, and maybe, Trump or somebody else, if they get in, they've talked about it before, but maybe we should just go ahead and abolish the Department of Education and leave schooling to local communities, right? And actually, practice local control. I think communities have the best idea of how to educate their children. And so the idea of independent school districts is a good concept. It's unfortunate because we don't actually function as independent school districts, even though we call them independent school districts. But that's the right idea, right? The closer you can be, the better it is. That community can educate their children better than some people in DC, right? Some bureaucrats.
There's this idea that I've been coming to lately. I've been more libertarian, and I've been moving away from that because I just look at I think that there's an idealistic realm where you can say, here's what I think is right.
Yes.
But even if I am right that a certain way of life is correct, is better, or a certain governance is better, the question of how do we get from here to there is a different story, So
100%.
That's what I'm concerned about. Like for instance, and I'm going to go off on a completely different tangent for just a moment, but I actually would be a proponent of legalizing drugs. However, it would have to be done in such a way that we treat addicts like they have a disease like depression or anxiety, and they have to get help. And it's a very regulated thing where you look at somebody that has an addiction problem as somebody that has to go see medical help. Maybe they get, just like you take a heroin addict and you give them, what's it called? Prednisone or something like that. I don't know. Methadone.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, it's basically a legal drug, And so if you do the same thing, you get them the help, you regulate it, and then they have to be on a path to some kind of healing, that there would be some kind of way for rehabilitation through that. Instead of treating them like criminals, you treat them like sick people. But I don't think it's realistic. You could not legalize drugs in this country unless you're instituting a system like that, and that's just not realistic. It's just not going to happen. We would throw out the laws, and we would see chaos. And so this idealistic, realm of no regulation, and somehow we can fulfill that through a better way of living. It's just, I think that it might be more realistic if you were starting a society from scratch, but not if you're going from where we're at to there. It seems like the same kind of thing is a danger when you get into some of these other areas where you have now that you've got the feds paying a certain part of school. Well, what are we going to do if we just eliminate that? Now we've got a black hole. We've got to do something with that problem. And in some ways, I see that as part of the issue with all of the reform bills getting passed for property taxes. It's like we're slowly taking the edges off of it one step at a time. We're going to get it to a place where it's cobbled together and it's got little nooks and crannies, and we've got a way of life where we're set up. And to get from that to a much healthier way of being is just too far of a leap. We'll never be able to get there. It's kind of like we're going to be forced into trying to make it better for this special group or that special group or that special group, and then we're not going to actually take care of the problem at its source. And it's kind of I know I'm kind of making a point from alternate ends of the universe with this, but it's the same kind of concept where to go from where we're at to a much better system, I think in some ways is a much harder challenge than to go from nothing to whatever that is.
Let me comment on that. One, I too, right, have libertarian leanings, and I've come more away from that. But I do think that ideological purity is important, and a few different reasons, right? One, let me draw the spiritual analogy, right? Like as Christians, I know you have strong faith, right? We've talked about this, and a few times we've had interactions in person. And so what is our job as Christians? Well, it's to be conformed to the image of Christ, right? It's to walk as he walked. Am I ever going to get to that point? Absolutely not, right? But is that the goal? Yes, that's the goal. And will I make progress over time attaining that? This is sanctification, right? So over time, as Christians, we become more and more conformed to the image of Christ. We're never going to get there. And we're still, even when I finally pass away, whenever that is, I'm not going to have made it, but I will become better and better because of this. You could call it like this ideological idea of what we're called to be as Christians. Well, you can make that same application to government. Like in the utopian, freest society, right, there would be a lot of those libertarian ideals. And so the ideals are important because it gives us something to shoot for. But in practicality, and this is where I'm not a libertarian, I'm a Republican, because I don't think you can't operate in the real world under this kind of ideological vision of government, right? The rubber has to meet the road somewhere. Now that can be our goal, but the reality is we're probably never going to get there, right? And especially with the far along in the timeline, maybe back in 1776, and when we were barely starting, but as government has grown and as technology has grown, I don't think we're ever going to get to this anarchist idea of just like us being able to live by ourselves. I mean, part of living in a community is being, with other people, right? And there's going to be differing opinions. And so I think it's healthy to have these ideological ideas and to want to shoot for as small a government as possible, but understanding that we're probably never going to get there. And the strides that we make are going to be incremental and they're going to be small, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? In the same way that, it's like, oh, I'm never going to be like Christ. Well, yeah, I'm not, right? But now we have the advocate, the Holy Spirit, that helps us, right? So that's kind of the one part of the analogy that doesn't work, right? It doesn't translate to politics, but I think the idea is still valid, right?
No, I think it's a great point. Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I would say that, you've actually been doing this really well, where you set the goals and said, hey, we want to eliminate property tax, but you kind of just, you set that vision. But then when it comes down to what you're talking about on a daily basis, it's like, okay, where are we at right now? What are the next steps? What are we dealing with? How do we hold these people accountable? And you're dealing with, you've got the ideal goal, but then the realistic, look at what are the next steps and where are we at today. So anyway, I think it's a great analogy.
Much progress as we possibly can, in the right direction.
Yeah. WK, so are they lowering it for homeowners? The Senate, the way I look at it is the Senate's version is a Band-Aid and the House's version screws everything up. And if they put it together, they're just going to get a Band-Aid that screws some stuff up. So we'll see, WK. It's too early to tell. What are the numbers of the bills so we can look them up? Can you rattle that off real quick?
So yeah, the bill that's being debated right now is SB3. That's the only one that matters at this point. And so I would look up SB3. It's currently sitting in the Senate with House amendments. If you wanted to know the other bills, the major one is HB2, but like they just took the language of HB2 and put it on Senate Bill 3, SB3. And so if you're curious of what's going on right now, look at SB3. That's what you need to be looking at.
There you go. Let's see here. What do we have? It says, what does MO stand for? Maintenance and operations. The other side of that is interest in sinking.
INS, right? Yeah. Interest in sinking, which is your bonds, your debts that we vote for, right? Which I highly recommend you vote against. But that's what the INS is.
There you go. Yeah. Anytime you vote for a bond, you're voting for a tax increase. And this is where I take a slightly different stance. I don't say vote against them all. All I say is, you need to know you're voting for a tax increase. And if you're going to vote for that bond, you need to make sure that what's in that bond is what your taxing jurisdiction actually needs. And here's the thing, but there's a slight difference between what I say and what you say. And I like the tension. I like to have the different messages out there because I think you need to have people out there saying vote against, because there are people out there saying vote for, and I'm somewhere in the middle just saying you need to analyze it and hold them accountable. But one way or the other, you need to know what's happening. And that's one thing you guys do a great job of, is just making sure people know when you pass a bond, you're passing a tax increase. Hey, is it always a property tax increase, or is it sometimes a sales tax increase? I don't know that.
It's always a property tax increase.
For real. That's so messed up.
Because
WK agrees with me. This is to a much earlier point, but I'll take the win one way or the other. I have no idea what he's talking about. But, appreciate your participation. How do we stop this? You cannot stop this webinar ever. We're going to last forever. Hey, here's my man, John Schleter. Let's see. Dadgummit. John, I'm going to flash this up. I have no idea what you're saying yet until I read it, but it looks to me, Oh, okay. No. I'm sorry. I thought this was like message 2 out of 3. But what you're saying is 2/3 of the average school board agenda has to do with approving tax exemptions, real estate deals, construction projects. Stop voting for people connected to construction and real estate development to local office. Foxes guarding the hen house. I'm going to pull this off, but can you comment on that for just a second?
All I have to say is amen. 100%. 100%. Now some of this, is just this is where I like to concentrate on the state more, because the state gives the ability to all these local governments to do this and provides the ability for them to have to deal with all of this, right? And so what I would like to see is way more accountability for independent school districts. Not only do we have them, there's always this narrative that, school districts are not funded enough. Yes, they are. We are overflowing with money. Our superintendents make more than neurosurgeons in Texas. I don't know if you know that or not. There is a massive amount of waste. The highest paid superintendent in Texas makes over $700,000 a year. That's not including gas vouchers and rent vouchers and things like that. The top 10, I think, all make over 400,000, not including vouchers, right? And you have what was it, Granbury, who had their private plane. You have there's like, I think Northwest ISD I think they passed a $2 billion bond. Right.
Okay, right now, real quick, I'm interrupting you. What's your website?
TexasTaxpayers.com.
Okay, so here's the reason why I wanted you to say it is because you've just this information I don't have. I wouldn't. So anyway,
I can just ramble for forever.
You got my ears perked up. I just want to give people another place to go off to. You don't have to wait till the end to hear the contact information. You go ahead.
So yeah, we've written articles about a lot of this stuff, but I think ultimately the problem with our government school system is it is overfunded, despite the fact that they're constantly saying they don't have enough money. The reality is they don't have accountability and there's no competition. And so I think that's where I think school choice needs to happen, because competition is what drives it. It improves outcomes. It drives down prices. And ultimately, school choice would actually benefit government schools because it would actually take students away, lowering class sizes. It would increase competition and make teacher salary ultimately go up, because if the government schools don't want to pay teachers more, they're just going to go to private schools and they're going to get paid more. And so the free market, I would argue, is the solution to basically every single economic problem if it's allowed to operate freely. That's the key, right? And the government's not picking winners and losers.
Well, let's keep going here. Do y'all realize Austin is going to be a 15-minute city? The mayor is on the C40 list. The city will tell me. All right, that's a different topic, but it got its airtime right there. John says Salman Bajimi is a real estate development attorney. Pretty sure he understands how this stuff. Yeah, I don't. Do you know who that guy is?
So he is Stickland's. So Stickland House District 92. That's who we represented. And Bojani's now 92 because they redistricted House District 92 to turn it into a Democrat seat. And so they basically took that seat away from Jeff Kaysen, who replaced Stickland. And so Bojani, I believe, represents Bedford, Euless, and maybe some of Hearst, and maybe a couple of others. So yeah, he's in the district that I'm very familiar with. I did not know he was a real estate development attorney, though. And he hasn't really commented this year much on property taxes that I know of, but good to know that he has some knowledge and maybe he could be an advocate in future sessions. Did I lose you? You froze on me.
Okay.
We back? Well, we back?
There's 21 people on here still, so everybody hung on. I don't know what happened. I think internet just crashed, but that's a sign that we probably ought to be wrapping this up anyway. Let me fly through these comments and then we'll shut it down. Let's see. That was John. All right, here we go. Robert says, my problem with property tax is that my property tax is now about 40% of my income. Whew, the tax is outstripping my income. Yeah. What can people like me do? Robert, if you Google, what can I do? Options. Let's hold on. Options if you can't afford your mortgage. Chandler Crouch. Options here. I'll put it in the deal here. Number one protest. There are a lot of different things that you can do, but I'm going to go ahead and paste that. Here's a lot of different options for you. Robert, let's keep going. WK has been getting a lot of airtime. If you really want to know, listen to John Stossel interview with Glory. All right, there you go. It's the plan. Ralph says, what is an M&O rate in Texas? A district property tax rate consists of maintenance and operations, tax rate, and if applicable, in interest and seeking. Okay, what is an M&O? It seems like Ralph.
He's answering his own question. I think. Yeah.
Okay, so he's just helping the conversation. Appreciate you, Ralph. The M&O rate provides funds for maintenance and operations. There you go. You just taking care of the conversation online. Rick says, agree. Abolish the Department of Education. The Texas legislature has power via, there you go. All right, Rick. You heard it from Rick. Just joining. Is there any relief for rental property owners? There is no limit on how it's too early to know. Don't hold your breath. And
compression compression affects all real estate. And so that's, again, why we prefer compression. And so when we compress rates, it compresses all real property. And so even if those caps aren't there that don't lower your taxes, right, that would help out in the long term, but hurt in the long term for homeowners, compression is going to lower rents because, well, as long as the market's allowed to operate and we don't introduce rent controls and things like that. So there's probably a longer explanation needed, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, I tell you what, Tim, and let's just see. Anybody else? Matt and Jody are saying he filled out this thing, wants to add some evidence to his protest. Just send my office an email, and we'll unlock it, and the button will show back up. We finalize the protest if we think if you tell us you're not going to add any evidence, then it's finalized. And so if you want to add it, we've got to unlock it. Rick, last but not least, he says, eliminate superintendent of schools. Let the principals of the school. All right, man, Tim, such a pleasure. Thank you so much. An hour and 20 minutes. You're the property tax champ. And it's just been nice to get to talk with you. I can't wait until we get to share a meal. But I appreciate you coming on and being willing to answer all these crazy questions and giving me a little bit more information about this. It seems like property taxes is the never-ending well of knowledge and stuff that you just like. It's a black hole, and without someone like you coming on to open our eyes to this stuff, we would just have no clue. So, can you tell us how people? What you want to send people to a website or contact information or whatever you want? What ask do you have of the folks?
One, visit us at texastaxpayers.com. In mid-June, I believe it's the 19th, is our current idea of when we're going to release the Fiscal Responsibility Index. So you're going to see how all of your legislators scored this session. So we're right in the process of finalizing that. It should be out in a few weeks, June 19th, texastaxpayers.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Texas Taxpayers. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'm a big fan of Twitter since Elon took over. And so I say, if you love free speech, hop on Twitter. But I think the website and Twitter should get it done. And we have tons of articles. We have our own podcast we have our plans up on the site, and you can go in right now and the little tab that says index at the top, you can click that, enter your address, and it's going to tell you who represents you and how they've scored all the way back to 2007. So we want to be a good resource for y'all. That's the best way to get a hold of us. And of course, you can email me directly and contact me directly as well on the website.
Rock on, man. You are the man. I appreciate you. And thanks for coming on. Have a great day.
Appreciate it. Pleasure having you.